tried to move from teaching history to actually using some of his ideas in the class, I have found that they've been incredibly successful and meaningful in our school.
I'm here to better understand Korczak's legacy, to widen my teacher repertoire.
It is vital in the United States that we look to learn from the world and with the world, and when Korczak was introduced to me, I felt that this was an opportunity both for our schools to walk the talk of learning from someone else great in another country, but also the principles themselves, I think, are what we need in this world right now.
How you as an educator keep believing that there is going to be a change, that we as educators can make something different, that we can create a generation, future generation, that will make the world better, more moral. My focus was moral education, but to my surprise, when I started to read what Korczak did, what Korczak wrote, what people were telling about what it is, the kids who survived, what they were telling, I saw that it's not only moral education, it's all educational world, a new educational world that is so ahead of his time, I think our time, kind of open in front of me. Teacher should research their own, teacher and principal should research their own setting. Korczak did it. Korczak taught his teachers to do it. He believed that every teacher should build on her or his own experience. You cannot take what somebody, theoretician who lives there, somebody university who is there, tells you about your student, about yourself. So everything that he wrote about, he said is only a starting point that should be adapted by each teacher according to who she is or he is, and according to the students that are in front of him, and it should be done year after year. So what worked for me last year doesn't mean it will work for me next year. 100 different hearts beat beneath exactly the same uniform. And in each case, different difficulty, different work, different care and concern. 100 teachers, 100 individuals were people, not people of the future, not people of tomorrow, but people now, right now, today. So the direction comes to the students, telling them, this is what you should be here. This is what the ideal person that I think you should be, and I'm going to make you that. It's my responsibility to make you that. Rather than respond to the student and say, what do you want to make of yourself? Experience. One of the major things in Korczak education is that you don't teach somebody what is good, you provide experiences in which the student learn how it feels, how to do the good. And if there is the future, we have to know what is the background of the child. What is his community, family, all the things the child comes to the class and does not tell us, but it's part of who or she is. Don't talk to the child, talk with the child. The pedagogical love is realistic love, in which you know that kids are not perfect, but they're human beings, and you're going to work with the human being. Right? So once you involve the children in creating their life, in creating their environment, education, social and emotional environment, you have a chance to do much better than you come with the rules and the punishment and the threats.
So what happens when you go from societies whose early childhoods look like this, and this is particularly focused on touch, to societies that do this to their young? Typical in the United States. So what happens when their basic needs are ignored? This is just sort of, I like this image because it shows you the normal brain on the left, which is lots of connections between the big fat thing is a brain cell, a neuron, And then it grows after birth, it grows all sorts of connections. It's like every second, thousands of things are growing in a baby's brain. But what happens when you stress the baby, leave him to cry, cortisol levels go up and they melt those connections. We are a dynamic system and those early conditions matter for the trajectory you're going to take. So if you undermine the baby's care, you are shifting their trajectory for good health. We've got kids coming into our classrooms with very little in the way of social skills, right? Social emotional intelligence. And that's what this I call developmental, ethical, ecological practice, DEEP. Sustaining and healing classroom then is going to provide self-calming practices, deep breathing, the brain gym, mindfulness, meditation, whatever. I use super learning, which is where you relax kids to 60 beats per minute, alpha brainwave state, and your forehead gets fuzzy when you're in that state, and you're able to learn. It's the moral character part. Kids are coming into school now, and they've been immersed in viciousness. You turn on the TV, you turn on social media, movies. There's all these violent, heroes now are violent. It used to be when I was a kid, the hero who could control their temper and not be violent was the hero. So within the classroom, we want to help them learn to be calm and to care for one another. We want them to be attuned to one another. And again, that takes some time for some students. And then you want to encourage a pro-social imagination. How can we help each other? How can we get along today? I see some of you are upset because of such and such, right? So what can we do to help ourselves get calm? So you're doing it in a democratic way as much as possible, and always with a focus on positive purpose.
It's about a trip that we took a year ago, but that we have been doing in rotation. And that is a trip into the southern part of the United States to talk to freedom fighters who were young when they became involved in the civil rights movement. And so that's what we want to pass on to you and to everyone, our ways of celebrating that amazing struggle.
The federal government took far too long to respond to the tragedy.
That his family home was demolished by Katrina, and it took them 9 years to rebuild.
Police intimidation supports a system that keeps Black residents economically struggling and exposed to random and unfair arrests. Bree and Taylor are part of an impressive movement. They're determined to stand strong against racism and encourage us to continue our activism.
It was held at Tougaloo College, where activists in the movement had been encouraged to seek safe haven in the 1960s.
Hollis was coordinating the event and he prepared us for this great opportunity.
We learned that while some progress has been made, racism and discrimination are alive and well.
Corruption in high places and educational systems that are failing to reach our children.
I think because we are always looking forward to something that kids can relate to that is serious, that kids have done, the whole idea of kids making history. I kicked myself when I finally realized, dang, that's what I should be teaching. This is how you bring people together. You bring people together who are Black and white and brown, and you figure out ways to do that.
Or something. Yeah. But I love how your journey took them to something recent, Ferguson, and then to New Orleans that had a personal connection, and it's sort of unexpected. We often don't think of a disaster like a natural disaster. So I love that idea of taking the more recent events, things that are still in the news today, that then take us back to those places, and the fact that they got to meet people who were truly involved and feel connected with what their experiences were.
My model was the middle schoolers who will study from sun up to sundown and then write in their journals.
And they like it.
They really like it.
Most of you probably know that's the place. Yes, that's the orphanage for Jewish children, which Korczak established. Almost in almost all institutions, values are something additional, or something we can resign, we can modify. In this institution, values, especially what we call agency or subjectivity. It was not something additional, but something the basis. Yes, and that's why our interpretation of the mechanism, the functioning orphans' home as a whole, is that was the experimental institution based on the agency, and agency we interpret as the capacity to have an intentional and real effect both on myself and my environment. I'll show you a fascinating similarity between that method and contemporary coaching. Please see 6 Principles of Coaching by John Rogers, who is very famous guru in a positive way in the UK of coaching. The client is resourceful. It is, like here. The coach role is to develop the client's very resourceful.
Resourcefulness.
Yes, I can, but maybe later. Coaching addresses the whole person, not the boy, not the bad boy, not the bad girl, the whole person. The client sets the agenda, 30, 40, I don't know, 180, yes? The coach and the client are equals, and that is maybe obvious for us today, but not for them, yes? And the coaching is about change and action, and not about something, someone is valuable or not valuable, yes? That's very important.
Is a technique called human library. Does anybody know? No, that's, you know more or less the human library. Okay, tell you which book is where. And you can, you know, when you buy a book, you look at the back of the book and it gives you a short description. So these are the descriptions of the books. Talk to you for about 10 minutes about a story which is about something to do with children, children's rights, a personal story, an experience that has changed them and what they wish to do to change society. When we talk about children's rights, we tend to stick, or generally, as some sort of legalistic political discourse, narrative. You know, the right to do this, the right to do that, and so on. But in actual fact, to bring children's rights alive, the clusters, which we can call the 3 Ps, is what's important is to bring those 3 Ps together, not to separate them. So in other words, participation doesn't come about by itself, and a lot of children, of course not with you teachers, but with other teachers maybe in other institutions, we spend a lot of time telling them to sit down, shut up, listen. You know? So it doesn't actually promote much participation, right? So it's not always automatic, and children learn a strategy at a very young age. If I give her the answer that she needs, she wants, she might leave me alone. Safe environment. And Janusz Korczak, what he did was he didn't see protection as something which is don't touch that and that's dangerous and all the rest of it. He saw it as a liberating, emancipating process where children could feel safe, they didn't feel intimidated, humiliated, and they could speak with confidence and with self-esteem in development. And we know that I work a lot with early childhood, and when we overprotect, then we're constantly saying, you know, we'll explain to you, we'll do this, oh, you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to do this, and so on. And so and when we underprotect, then children don't feel safe, they feel they're in a dangerous situation, and so they're not free. So it's finding a good balance. As Korczak pointed out, was there's no recipe for this. There's no middle ground that works for everyone. It depends, each child's different, each context's different, each adult's different, so we need to be conscious about creating that. So creating a protective environment. And that works for provision as well. What we provide, the space, the materials, the professionals, the attitudes, everything that we need that children can feel that they have what they need in order to participate.
So often, especially in probably many of the communities that we are familiar with, we begin to create this
space where the adults are the ones who know what's going on, and they're informing the children about what it is that's going to happen, and then we all move forward. In the world that I think many of us dream about, we dream of this idea that youth do in fact have the ability to have their own ideas, their own stories, their own narratives, and are able to be a part of that process. My assumption, though I caution people not to make assumptions, but my assumption today is that you're all here because you, to some extent, believe that that is true. That youth, in fact, do have voices and stories and experiences that are really important for them to use. The video is meant to just kind of give you the tiniest taste of what it is that we do in Kids for Peace. As an educator, and I think other educators that I talk with often fall into the trap of desperately wanting to empower our youth to do things, and yet knowing that they are going to need some level of support to do that. And so trying to strike the balance between what it means to be empowering them and educating them, but also giving them the space to mess up sometimes and to figure out who they are in the world and figure out what their stories are. And so one of the things that we do in Kids for Peace is really try and find that balance, as hard as it is to find. So we empower youth to create more peaceful communities in a variety of different ways. The more opportunities that you have to talk to somebody who's different than you, the more opportunities you have to tell your own about human beings, regardless of the age that they are. Every human has a story or stories about their life. And we are the only ones who can know our own stories. And it doesn't matter what age we are the only ones who know our stories and can give voice to our stories. Talking about what happened, why it happened, and how it impacted us, and how it inspired us to continue to go forward. So across Kids for Peace, across the world, in Jerusalem, in France, across the United States, we live deeply into this. We're coming with different experiences of what it means to be female in the world, what it means to be Jewish in the world, what it means to be, insert a million identity markers here. We're the only ones who can do that. We deeply, deeply believe that youth and adult voices are equal and that they are meant to exist alongside one another. Because there's two things that we can carry into the world. We can carry our own stories and our own narratives. And often, we can be the vessel that gives voice to other stories and others' narratives. There's a community that exists both at the center and at the outside of ourselves. And this community is made up of people from all over. Sometimes it's made up of just the people who are right there in the room with you that day. Sometimes it's made up of people who you've met across the world for various reasons and everywhere in between. How are you showing up in a way that's enabling everyone in that space, regardless of age or other identity, to be able to own their own narrative? And as challenging as it is, and I spend my days like hitting my head against a wall trying to figure out how to do this, and it's really hard. But as challenging as it is, how are we allowing everyone in a space, in a classroom, in a meeting, to claim their own narrative in a way that allows us to learn from them, rather than placing an assumed narrative on top of them? Kids for Peace as an organization has resources around identity and dialogue and diverse conversations, and all of the kind of challenging questions I'm leaving you with are things that we have curriculum and resources to support. So if this is something that you're interested in, and as you look at this you have questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out to me.
John is Korczak. His birth name was Henrik Goldschmidt. And at this point, I just let them know that, one, he was the first advocate for children's rights, and that he is my personal hero. You're going to be learning about this man again later and again, and you're going to know him very well by the time we're through this. Young teachers, how to teach about the Holocaust is the importance of teaching this through human eyes, the importance of teaching about life before the Holocaust. Who were these people? And it's really important to me that they see these victims as people. They see them as kids, just like themselves. This really plays into teaching them the importance of empathy. Because the first thing they want to do is they want to sympathize. But what they need to have is empathy. I don't know what found poetry is. Found poetry is basically pulling poems from sources. That sounds, you know, it's actually really easy. And it's where instead of if I just told kids, okay, now, I want you to sit down and write a poem about Janis Korczak. I have some who could, and I have some that would be just like, their eyes would get big and they would be, I don't know what to do. So this gives them structure. So found poetry is, again, and there's a really good website the Library of Congress has. If you go to their website, they have a link. So it's actually looking at something else to make poetry.
And it's from George Bernard Shaw, and the quote is, "We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing." Ideas of Korczak that were remarkable, and I felt I would love to get them involved in my class. In the orphanage, and he started it before the orphanage, in his camps, where he would actually believe that kids could handle their own issues. And if they handled their own issues, they would solve them better than we could solve them. I thought, wow, what a dream. That would be so interesting to have a court in a public school run by children. We now have a court in a public school run by children. We have a youth court, Sharpsville youth court, and it functions according to the restorative justice model that is current in America, where you would have this sense of repairing the harm as opposed to punishing the offender. The way I came upon this and put this together with Korczak was in the summer I attended a legal conference that was talking about, it said youth court breaking the school to prison pipeline. Yeah. And if you're aware of the school to prison pipeline, that's all based on zero tolerance. And mainly in urban centers where at-risk youth have had X number of infractions and are kicked out of school right where they need to be, and they have really no other options than to continue on that path, and not really a productive way. And they call it the pipeline, the school to prison pipeline. It changed my life because it gave me the ability to then tell my school or work with my school. I had this idea to bring this model that we've been studying academically with what the kids are doing anyway, and put it in a class and let kids become stakeholders in their own disputes, their own resolutions. They come up with their own solutions. The kid's the judge, the kid's the bailiff, the kids are on the jury. I think it's Korczakian in the sense that kids control whether or not you want to say, oh, this is exactly the way you want his court. Of course not, you know? But this is a way I view it as a beautiful hybrid to make it relevant, again, for something that's important. There's no problem with having rules and boundaries in Korczak's vision, as I read it. I mean, he even says, quote, so does this mean that everything should be allowed? You would think, well, you have punishing or you have people brought back. One sounds really wishy-washy and soft. Korczak would say, does this mean everything should be allowed? Never, not on your life. By prohibiting things, we are coaxing the will in the direction of self-control and self-denial. We also encourage inventiveness. The inventiveness a child can operate within a limited sphere. So if you give them parameters, if you give them boundaries, their inventiveness will take hold and they will create. And they will be stakeholders and they will own it. And I'm thinking, God bless you. And then she said, could you rephrase that question? And she protected the person and it restored. It happened 2 other times. I have this on video. It's absolutely wonderful. We didn't quibble whether or not he gave them, the kids gave them, somebody gave them, whatever. Postcards were given, postcards were accepted, postcards were valid, right? They were something that he did and they were written on, and whether later on it was part of the court process, in my view of our court, it's essential to our process. We mailed the cards to each other in a package to the teachers, and from then, we then used the back of the cards to create messages based on traits from the Island on Bird Street that were shown to be courageous, that were shown to be anti-bullying, whatever policies that were important to our school at the time. I used them for anti-bullying. I actually have copies for. Secondly, these were I have, I actually blew up some of them so you could see it.
Understand
Yeah.
that the postcard starts with one school or the other, right? And the students write a quote on it and then...
That one. No, they did. They would start in a big pack, then we'd give them to the groups. We would separate. It was actually really fun when they got to choose their cards and write their own piece according to a rubric, very clear rubric. Then they would send them back, and they would also give them to people in their community. I adapted the project to how can I use reading strategies? How many of you teach reading? Or if you notice you have a book, you could put any book here. And as students read, we're required as public school teachers to have them responsible for close reading and independent reading. And if you notice this block here, if you measured it, it is strangely the size of a postcard. And below there's a quotation. So I have them read, and I often do this for many reading assignments. And I just have them draw or put a symbol. I cross that artistic block all the time because I accept whatever the heck they do once I see it. Postcards, or originally, or the kids would determine they would want postcards and they would petition for them, but there are actual postcards that have his signature on it for very mundane things, little things that he believed that would incrementally empower them, and that they could even ask to get a postcard. And I feel that if you integrate and incorporate Korczak and these things, I mean, my God, what better way are you going to be teaching a class?
Responsibility and hope.
Relationships, community, and trust.
Grateful to be with beautiful teachers.
Energized.
Support.
Open-hearted.